Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today it's time to do a video kind of as a post-mortem on the Operation Shipyard events, giving my ideas for the event itself, positive, negative, and also some improvements that if this type of event is run in the future, which I'm pretty sure it will be, hopefully will be heard. So the general ideas of Operation Shipyard, I think the event itself, if we just look at the core structure of it, is generally pretty good. When we talk about the ideas of the workshop, when we talk about the building elements, when we talk about the vehicles themselves, they're all generally good, but unfortunately the actual event itself is let down by a few key factors. So I'm going to go through them in this video, and I've got a simple bullet point thing here, and we're going to go through them individually. So the first thing is the vehicles themselves. So this event had 4 vehicles in total, one being a vehicle that was available before, the Whirlwind P9, and then 3 new ones in the form of the MBK-161, the VT-12, and the H-34. Now, my opinion on event vehicles is that they should be fun and interesting, display new ideas to the game, and also on top of it, not be meta-defining. That is probably the biggest thing for me. I don't like the fact that, people can get stuff which is completely meta-defining, and that means that you have a scenario where it won't always be available to everyone. Now, some people now will argue with the gaijin market being in play that now everyone can get hold of these vehicles. Well, the console guys can't. That's still an obstacle for them, and we do have to make sure to take them into account. So looking at each of the vehicles, we'll start off with the VT-12. The VT-12 I think is a really nice vehicle when it comes to an event vehicle. It obviously is completely different, not having any horizontal drive at all, and also adding in the new mechanic, which is on top of it. This new aiming mechanic, which has meant that a lot of people have got a general taste of how this mechanic is going to work for later vehicles, maybe stuff such as the STRV-103 that everybody has brought up. The fact that you have an interesting vehicle which has this new aiming mechanic is really interesting to me. Now, the vehicle itself, is it meta-defining? My opinion is no. It has a lot of very nice things to it. It's got great speed. Obviously, the guns themselves are incredibly potent, being L44s with the DM, I believe they have 12, don't they? The DM-23 round, which is going to punch through everything it finds at 8.3, but the aiming system is a little bit too clunky. It has a little bit of input lag with it, and also the vehicle itself moves while you're using it. If you're on a hill looking upwards, then it's going to move you down the hill. If you're looking down a slope, it will move you down the slope. So therefore, trying to set up in positions to be effective can be annoying as hell. I did a overall review of the VT-12 if you want further thoughts, but basically this to me is a good event vehicle because it displays interesting ideas which are different to the current game, and also it is not meta-defining. The next vehicle we're going to look at is the MBK-161. Now, this kind of fills the same role of the VT-12 in slightly different ways. So a lot of people will just look at this and think, well, it's very similar to the MBK-161-44. Which I would say, yes, it is quite similar, apart from it is, slightly worse. It's got a lot less armor on it, and also this machine has an extra 45, which is very, very useful. The 1943 at its level of 2.3, which I think eventually it will go up to 2.7, just because of the amount of armor that's on the vehicle. 52mm and 60mm here is nothing to choke at. It is incredibly well armored if you come up against a lot of stuff which is in that 1.3 to 2.3 range, which is firing stuff like 50 cals at you. If you stay at range with this and just pop people with your T-34 turrets, you're going to do incredibly well. It's a very good vehicle, but it has some disadvantages. It is incredibly slow. If you're in arcade, it's a little bit quicker, but you're still going to get torped a lot. You're still going to get bombed a lot, and at shorter ranges, you can get taken apart because there's only 18mm of armor here, and over here you can easily get into this ammunition area back here, which is just covered by the 52, but if you aim about here, you can sneak in shells and blow up this ammo rack. It also doesn't have a lot of crew, only 39, so its actual survivability is very much tied to its armor, so if you pierce that, you're pretty much screwed. The other thing that is the nice new mechanic that this has is the BM-37 mortar. A lot of people have overlooked this, and I understand why, because we have ships which have mortars. You know, they have bomb mortars, or they have, launchers on the back for stuff like depth charges. The vehicle that we got in the Operation Heat event, you know, the River class, has a ton of these on it, as you can see here, 34 and 48. But for this MBK, this is what I would class as a land mortar or a field mortar, which is just plonked on the front of it. So it actually has a decent range to it. It actually has 50 rounds, 30 rounds per minute, and you're able to go 180 degrees with it, meaning that you can go 90 left and 90 right. And even though in the grand scheme of things for naval, it's not going to be that useful, you know, it's not going to be some defining thing, it is so much more useful. Oh, they actually added the sound now. Oh, that's wonderful. It didn't have its sound before, now it has its sound. But the thing is, with this mortar, is it is so much more useful than other mortars. It seems to work perfectly, and it makes me hope that in the future we will see more vehicles which are based around this idea. So the idea being, what about a mortar truck, or what about a late tier vehicle which actually has access to some form of mortar system? So for me, it's got a unique mortar on it. It's not meta defining at its BR. This is the other gift premium from the Battlefield Engineer event, and also there is a reason to take other machines over it in the tech tree. So even though I believe both of these should be 2.7, I can understand why they're not, and because basically of their speed and the not much survivability on the MPK Project 122 BIS. So for me, it's a good event vehicle. It has interesting characteristics to it which are different to others. The next vehicle is the Whirlwind. The Whirlwind itself is just a Whirlwind. It's been around before. This is probably the weakest out of the event vehicles. I understand the idea of bringing vehicles back from specific events in the past. The Whirlwind P9 was actually given out in a festive event, I think in 2018. So it's not something that's really that old either. Like, we're not talking about a vehicle from 2015 or 2016 like the i301. So it was kind of odd to see this machine, but it is nice to see it brought back, only for the fact that now you can get it on the market for about $4, which means that there is now like a plethora of really nice vehicles which are under the $5 mark on the gadget market, which would be great to pick up. Now, this isn't something that's exclusive to the Operation Shipyard event, because some of those vehicles are things like the Su-85A, which were out of the festival event this year. So, it's nice to see that vehicles like the Whirlwind P9 are being brought back in a capacity and also brought back onto the market. But for me, I would have much preferred to see a vehicle like the Key 94-2, which I don't think is really meta-defining at all, and it doesn't have premium attached, and also it gets this really wacky and interesting camo. So yeah, it's one of those things which it's a little bit odd that the P9 was chosen, but if this is a precedent set for later events, especially for these building events that they're going to bring back older vehicles, then I'm fine with that, really. I think one out of the 4 vehicles or one out of the 2 vehicles not being new would be completely fine. The next vehicle, the last vehicle, is the H-34. Now, the H-34, which you find here at 8.0, has a bunch of rockets attached to it that you can see, but the main thing being the bullpup, which everybody's talking about. The fact that you get this as a stock thing, even though this is a premium vehicle, it is nice that you get access to all munitions at the same time. It's also the first helicopter event vehicle that we've had. So being the H-34, being a vehicle that isn't, too overpowered in the air, it doesn't really have anything that can keep it alive against a bunch of other 9.0 helicopters, which is what it's going to fight in the helicopter EC mode. And when it comes to the ground forces, you either take this or the AH-1G. It's nice to have a separate option, which isn't just from the tech tree. So I think generally, as an event vehicle, the H-34 is pretty good. It has the opportunity in ground forces to be able to trade one for one. I see a lot of people talking about this bullpup as if it's the bringer of rain or the destroyer of worlds. Well, yeah, for one target. And then you've got to go and land again, and then you've got to go pick up another one. It also only has a 4-kilometer operational range. There is a lot of ways of dealing with the H-34 at 8.0, and a lot of them come down to just making sure that there is some physical land between you and the helicopter. And I understand that is not always something that's going to happen, but you've also got to understand the most the H-34 is going to be able to do in a battle in ground forces within, let's say, a 5-minute period is to trade 1 for 0. So it's going to be able to hit an enemy with a bullpup, kill it, and then it's pretty much useless until it gets another bullpup, right? So even then, its capabilities are incredibly limited. So for me, it's demonstrating new ideas in the form of this 20mm cannon pod. It also has this bullpup attached. It also has sets of stuff where you can bring a bunch of different guns, as you can see here, like this 20mm along with 12-7s and 7-7s, and a bunch of rockets on top of it. I like this as an event vehicle. I don't like the fact that helicopters are in the game, but if you're going to put in a helicopter event vehicle, which I think helicopters have been around enough, they've been around for more than a year now, to put one in, you would have to put in something like this. So for me, it's fine as an event vehicle. So pretty much all of them are, they're not really meta defining. You can make all of them look great in highlight clips, but at the same time, they don't have the staying power that something at their BRs would normally have. The Whirlwind might be the exception to that, but it still has a hell of a lot of counters coming out of the German and Italian tech trees, and also the Japanese with stuff like the J2s. So for me, the vehicles are all pretty good picks. I can understand why people got annoyed by the MBK-161. Oh, it's another Soviet event boat. Why isn't America getting an event boat? Hopefully next time we'll see a nation such as America, or maybe such as Germany, getting an event boat, since Japan and the Soviets have got some as well. But overall, good picks. The next thing is the event setup. So the event setup is pretty much how to actually do the event, and this can be split into 2 ideas. So the first one is just playing the game, getting battle activity 50% every time you hit the 10-minute mark. When it comes to battle time, basically, you get a box drop. That box drops between 1 and 3 materials, and that's about it. The second idea, which was on top of this, was the blueprints. Now, the blueprints themselves dropped every 10 minutes up to a maximum, and then after that maximum, you had to get first places. So the best way, the most efficient way of playing this event, if you wanted all of the vehicles, which was not something that I personally set up for, at the end of the event, I could have pushed myself to get all of these vehicles, but I didn't want to, and we'll get into that in a bit, just because the event is not designed for an individual like myself. But the fact is, just play for 10 minutes, get the blueprints, get the parts, and after being able to get all of them, you will be able to build at least 2 of the vehicles without having to do anything else. If you wanted to get more than that, you had to get first places, and every time you got a first place, you got blueprints. The other thing on top of this is it was set up in 2 separate ways. So for your first ship, you only got basic components. So you only got 2 different sets of components, and then when it changed onto the next ship, you could get a set of 6 different components. And what this meant was all of the things that you had got from your first ship was completely useless for your second ship, all of the components. So I actually saved up 10 of the containers from the basic materials because I was building as I was going along, but I, was ahead of the curve on the first ship, and those were completely useless because this opened up on the secondary ship, and therefore, yes, it was kind of annoying. So we'll split it into 2 parts. So the first ship itself, the MBK 161, you could either trade it for an MBK, or you could trade it for a Whirlwind P9. Overall, I thought, at least from my experiences, I didn't have any issues with it. The components dropped completely fine. I did have some reports from individuals where they were basically just dropping all of one side of the materials and none of the other, basically meaning that they had a scenario where they had a ton of one of the materials and none of the other. Now, this could be rectified with use of the market, but if you're a console player, then that can't be rectified, which is why when it comes to me doing the events, I don't use the market unless I'm finished and I just want to get rid of everything. So even though I didn't have the problem with the drop rates, if other people were having this issue and I saw screenshots of people having this issue, then that is a problem. It shows that there is something which is put into the code on the drop rates which makes it not unfair, but it makes it favored towards one material over the other. This was also something we found when looking at the second boat and everything, because after you completed the first boat, the second boat and onwards were all completed the same way. So after working out, how to do that and looking at the assembly scheme, you could work out how many parts you required. And we actually worked out on the tech hub how much of each material you needed. You needed at most, you needed a lot of cast iron and steel, then you needed a little bit less non-ferrous, a little bit less wood, and a decent amount of these as well. So the amount you required for each of these materials was not the same, and their drop rates because of that were not the same. Now, I ran into an issue on my tertiary boat, so on my third boat and then my fourth boat, that I was fine with all of these materials here, the 5 materials, but the problem I was running into was the non-ferrous metals. I was always short of them, no matter what I did. I ended up with about 80 of the steel, about 30 or 40 of the cast iron, 20s of each of these, and I was still struggling for non-ferrous metals, which to me shows that the drop rates are not the same. For these ingredients. They were, in effect, not as random as would say. There was something inbuilt into the system which would mean that something would drop more than another. Now, this would be completely fine if we were told about this in the first place, but nothing was ever communicated about this, that there would be different drop rates for different items. This meant that the market, the gaijin market, has to pretty much work out which ones are going to be more rare and which ones are not going to be as rare, and that only will come on probably the 5th or 6th day when people have worked out the drop rates of each of these materials. If it was in my opinion, I would rather just have the assembly scheme. It would take 20 of each of these materials, or maybe 30 of each. No matter what the number is, just make sure that it is the same number for each of these materials, and make the drop rates the same for all of them. So since there's 6 materials, you do 100 divided by 6, which is what? It's about like 15 or something like that, 15, it's around about 15% each, and just do it like that. It would be much easier, and it would mean that you wouldn't be in a scenario where you have a massive amount of one material and not a massive amount of all the others, which was a scenario which happened to me and a scenario that happened to a lot of others. So from that point of view, That was an issue. From the building point of view, the assembly part, I thought was very engaging. I generally liked the assembly scheme. I liked the fact that we had these production ideas, even though they didn't really make a difference because you were still waiting to be able to grind the parts out. So having these in, making them, lowering down the timer for these components, it didn't matter to me because I was building as I was going along. So, I like the idea. It just seems kind of pointless to have these. Then having these as well. But then at the end, with these, I suppose, made a little bit more sense, but we'll get into that. So, yeah, I think when it comes to these enhancements ideas, these could be handled better. Maybe these could be used as random drops, and maybe they reduce the amount of components that you need for a specific part of the assembly line. Like, let's say you are able to randomly drop a pipe processing production unit. You get it, and that means that this cuts to maybe 4 steel instead of 6. Maybe that's the way you could do it, so it actually has more of an impact than time, because time was not the issue with this event when it came to the actual building process. The time was actually the grinding out bit of the event. The next part as well, moving on to the workshop ideas as well. The shipyard component, I understand why it's there. I think that was a good addition. It basically meant that you could only build one part at once. This meant that scalpers, when it came to the market, could not just could not just force buy pretty much everything on the first day. They did then put in the instantaneous idea, so you could, build this instantaneously, so therefore you could do it, but you did it at an increased price. So therefore it was harder to work out the profit margins, and therefore it wasn't as nice for people to do. So I think those measures put in, I liked them. I thought they were very nice to the overall thing. Now let's talk about the blueprints. Let's do the comparison to the Battlefield Engineer event and the IS-7 event. So the IS-7 event, even though a lot of people saw it was very grindy, I finished the IS-7 in about 4 days out of the 11 days. This meant that I was, pretty much ahead of the game. I ground very hard for those 4 days, and I was able, or maybe 5 days, it was about 4.5, 5 days, I was able to get the IS-7. And I never had an issue with rare components. I never had an issue with any parts. They would just drop, and I would build stuff. And it worked out that if you just ground the machine and the T-34E, what would happen is the special parts would drop along the way of you getting the normal parts. So therefore, the time to build the machine was never going to be altered by the fact that you couldn't get these rare drops. Now this changed on the second IS-7 when you were building it, but the main thing was for the first, IS-7, which everyone was going for, it was completely fine. The drop rates were great. It worked incredibly well in my opinion. It was the best event of this style. When it comes to the drop rate of items. I never felt like I was stuck anywhere in the i7 event, whereas with this event I was stuck because of the artificial drop rates for stuff like the non-ferrous metals. And then the next one, Battlefield Engineer, the Battlefield Engineer was just rigged. The event was completely rigged after the 4th vehicle, and I've seen no compelling evidence to actually tell me otherwise, because I cannot find a single soul who was able to put together their 5th vehicle without using the market. Now, this includes unofficial and official sources from Gaijin. This includes every player I've come across. The only people who were able to were console players who basically bought their way through, which I don't see as legitimate compared to, what I was talking about. So for me, if we compare the Battlefield Engineer event to this, this is way better because you can actually complete it. The way I put it is this event was improbable, but it could be done. The Battlefield Engineer event was straight up impossible. You could not complete it if you weren't using the market. It was impossible for you to do so. So yeah. Therefore, the Shipyard event was much better than the Battlefield Engineer event in this regard. The i7 event, in my opinion, though, just coming to the grinding idea, was the best out of the three. The thing I would have liked to see back from the i7 event, the Battlefield Engineer event, though, was the test drive portion of the i180. I kind of missed that in this event. I like the idea that the IS7, you tested out the i180, you worked out what was wrong with it. If you got it correct, you got a little bit of boost on building the thing, and also, you know, taking apart the components and repairing them. I generally thought was a pretty cool idea. Would have been nice to see that back for this event. Hopefully, it'll be here in later events. The other thing as well, when it comes to building elements, thematically, it makes no sense to build two MBK-161s and somehow that morphs into a VT-12. The whole idea of an event like this is that you are building these vehicles. And the fact is, if I'm building two MBKs, how does that equal a H-34? Is there some weird black market dealer who wants two MBK-161s in order to build, you know, and in order to transfer for a H-34? Well, if that's the case, fair enough. But wouldn't it make more sense thematically to have different assembly schemes for different vehicles and therefore build each vehicles independently? You can still bring in the caveat of before, which is you have to build one of the lower vehicles first, which is what you had to do for this event. You had to build an MBK-161 and then either trade it in for an MBK-161 or a Whirlwind. So have that caveat in, but then when you open it, it says, what would you like to build? And then you pick the VT-12 or the H-34 or one of these again, and then you get a different assembly scheme for that different vehicle, a different, you know, test drive, and to me, that would just make a lot more sense thematically than what we have here, which is a weird trade system. And I think this could be done if you broke the event down into an individual basis, meaning that you only do one vehicle at once per event, but we'll get into that in a bit. The next idea is the market. So obviously the market is a part of the game now. If we just look at it comparing the other events, the fact that it wasn't as heavily required this time compared to the Battlefield Engineer event makes me happy. I still think, especially when we look at the blueprints, it was a little bit heavy when it came to the market use, even though eventually, because there was a massive supply and a lower demand than that supply, a lot of these parts became incredibly cheap incredibly quickly, including stuff like the VT-12 and the H-34. I still think the ideas are still a little bit too far in favor of the Gaijin market. I would rather them be more in favor of the i7 ideas instead of the Battlefield Engineer ideas and the blueprints. So I think if you were going into this event just wanting two of the vehicles, like wanting to create three MBK-161, so you can either get one of the higher vehicles and one of the lower vehicles, or three of the lower vehicles. If you're going in with that mindset, this event was perfect for you. You know, you had the time to be able to do it. You had, you know, you had all of the resources to be able to do. You just had to play the game. It was very simple. If you're an individual who wanted all the vehicles, who wanted all four of the vehicles, so therefore needed to build 6 MBK-161s, the blueprints were the limiting factor, and they made the game, at least for me, very, very, very depressing. And for one key factor, so these. Now, the way that the blueprints worked, as I said, you get a maximum amount until you hit a point. And the point for me was actually higher than what was described on the terms of Operation Shipyard. So it actually talks about here that most active players will be able to receive 480 and 320, but just by playing you could get 240 of the ships and 160 of the tanks. I actually got more than that while just randomly playing the game without getting first places. So that was kind of nice. So that was probably a bug in the system, but it was at least nice. The problem came in when I had to start getting first places in order to be able to get the ship blueprints. And remember, so if you wanted more than 3 vehicles, you had to, if you wanted more than to build 3 MBK-161s, you needed to get a bunch of first places, because a first place would give you a blueprint. If you got a first place on the first ship build, you would only get a ship blueprint, or the subsequent ones, you get 1 ship and 1 tank blueprint, which was, really nice. So what this meant was, I went full tryhard mode the last few days, played the ridiculously good meta lineups that I enjoy, like this one, the 2.3 American lineup. And the problem with this is that, yes, it's very good, yes, I get a lot of first places out of it, but am I having fun? And the answer is no. There is no fun here for me. And maybe this is a personal issue when it comes to War Thunder, but for me, I don't get fun from War Thunder playing the massively meta vehicles and just stomping face in them. For me, the fun in War Thunder is playing with other people, is enjoying historic vehicles, which, I'm not going to see in any other aspect, unless maybe another game comes out like War Thunder, which I'm highly skeptical of. I prefer World War II vehicles to the modern day vehicles, which is why I play a lot of rank 2 to 5 basically, and I just grind as I go, and I just play as I go. I don't really have, I don't think, oh, well, this vehicle is really good, I should go and play that right now. That's not the case at all. It really isn't and never will be. So when I'm faced with a challenge where it's like, hey, you've got to be the best of the best, and you've got to do it 160 times for tanks and 240 times for tanks, I'm not interested. And it just means that I am now being forced to do something in the game which I am not interested in doing. I have no interest in the competitive side of War Thunder. I think, personally, it is just kind of a red herring when it comes to the overall game itself. I think War Thunder is much more about community. I think it's much more about looking at the historic side of stuff, and it's much more about camaraderie than it is about the competition. Otherwise, we would have had an ELO system put in a few years ago, and we would have also had much more thrust into the competitive ideas in, PvP sense in normal matchmaking. As I said, in an ELO system or in ranks, being gold, silver, or whatever the hell. So for me, it's just not there. And making it so you need first places for blueprints, I think, was a little bit steep. I think it would have been much better if these were maybe top 1 to 3 places, or maybe every 20 kills, or maybe every 20 kills / assists, you get an extra blueprint, putting them into the challenges, or maybe if you win a mission, you get a blueprint. Because the thing is, score can be manipulated so badly in this game. You can do it in aerialistic with attackers or even fighters and just go ground pound. In ground forces, you can just get shot a lot, or you can manipulate it by flying specific machines, or using specific vehicles, machine gunning and scouting and shooting everything you find. I think it's not a good system to work off for any event, which is why I'm happy that they got rid of the ones where it was like, get 2018 score to advance this. It's much better in the long run to tie it to actual tangibles, such as kills, or such as assists, such as wins, and so on and so forth. Make it more of a team idea instead of an individual idea, and I think it will be a hell of a lot more fun. So the blueprints thing was really the downside for me for this event, and that's because of the completionist angle. If you were just there for the 3 vehicles, you were fine. If you were there for all of them, the blueprints, unless you were a complete try-hard competitive person, it was incredibly hard to get past from just from a mental stability point of view. So the grind itself, as I said, we pretty much covered that. It's overall okay. I think it could be lessened a little bit, but that would be done through the ideas that I've already talked about. The actual, the drop rates on the items being the same, and also the blueprints being, put into, as I said, either kills or wins or something that isn't related to first places and score. Exchanging materials. So they added this idea after the event, or, well, not after the event, but during the event, this news post came out that you could exchange materials for these crates, and you basically just, sorry about that, you basically just go here, and you exchange materials here, and it tells you what you can get from these. Now, I think overall the idea here is great. The fact that you don't have to use the market, the fact that you if you have some extra resources, you can maybe get yourself a coupon of an older vehicle or a camouflage. The problem is, in practice, it seems to have been too heavily in favor of the war bonds. So I've talked to many people on this. I haven't actually opened any of these boxes myself. I didn't see the point in them because I have all these vehicles anyway, and I am just not interested in these camouflages. So I sold everything from my shipyard before this announcement. And when the announcement came out, I knew that I wasn't going to do it. So after talking to a bunch of people about it, it seems like the majority of the time, and we're talking about 95% to 99% of the time, it would give you war bonds for opening these chests. Now, those odds are too high, way too high. They need to be lowered much. The probability of getting an item out of this needs to be a lot higher than that for a system like this to be fair. Because if you're just giving people war bonds for putting in these materials, you could do that anyway. So for me, it would just be much better if they just increase the odds on all of these ideas. And what is the worst that can happen? It devalues some stuff on the Gaijin market. That's fine. That just means you get more interactions, you get more transactions, and you get your 20%. So therefore, as long as you don't devalue it enough, which you won't do if you just made these maybe a 20% drop rate, a 20% for all of these, and these would be a little bit higher drop rate than these, and it would be completely fine. But from at least reports from people, it was way too high for this. Way too high. So the idea, great. The concept, great. The actual outcome, the problem, once again, the probabilities were skewed. And that is an issue we've seen quite a lot when it comes to these style of events. The next idea, so the CC program. Now, I'm pretty sure I can talk about this because I've already talked about this. If not, I apologize, doesn't matter. So the fact is, on the Operation Heat event, I made I made a video talking about an issue that I personally foresaw. And it was an issue where, as content creators, it was publicly said that we could basically say to Gaijin, hey, could we get these vehicles on a permanent basis? And they would say yes, or they would say no, have some test drives, depending on, your numbers and your metrics and all of this stuff. And the problem that I brought up then was that you could double dip. You would be able, as a content creator, to double dip, and you also have the power as a content creator to create videos saying something is good or something is bad, and technically altering the market forces on those vehicles. Now, you may think that that is not the case, right? You may think that content creators generally don't have a lot of power when it comes to these things. That's untrue, and you're going to have to take my word on this. Because obviously I can't show you the numbers, a lot of it is very private, but when it comes to specific ideas, such as the humble bundles, right? So when we talk about and do videos on the humble bundles, talk about the packs that they're offering, the incredible discounts that they do on War Thunder packs, the fact is, when it comes to the affiliate link, a lot of people buy those packs because they're great value, and also it's a way to support the Discord and to support the channel. And it just shows that there is marketing power in trying to sell ideas to your audience. And if a bunch of content creators came together and were like, hey, we're going to double dip here, and we're going to get, if I just show you my inventory, let's say we're going to all band together and just say the BF110 is like the greatest thing since sliced bread, and then that's going to increase the market on it, and because we're able to double dip by asking for the vehicles and also grinding them out, then we can then sell them at a higher price than we wouldn't before. Right? So this was an ethical issue, in my opinion, and I brought it up, and as you can see, I was able to fully double dip on this event, and just to prove that I could do it. Now, these are going to stay in my account for a very long time, probably, ad infinitum, just because of the fact that I don't want to I feel horrible selling them because technically, it's going against the ethical side of everything. So these are just going to stay here as proof that that was a problem in Operation Heat. Now, the way that it was handled for this one, Operation Shipyard, is as content creators, you could, during the event, you could ask for test drives, and then after the event, you could then ask for permanent systems for these vehicles. And we're talking about like 20 days after the event, and so therefore, all the market stuff is taken into account, so you can't technically alter the market in that time. And also what they can do is, if you've decided to grind out these vehicles in the event, like let's say I have the VT1, which I do, right? And then I go, hey, Gaijin, could I have the VT1 too? And then they go, no, you already have it. So I can't double dip here, right? And the other thing as well is, let's say that I built the VT12 and then I sold it on the market, and then I go, hey Gaijin, could I get the VT12? Even though I've already sold one, they can look at my purchase history, because of course they have access to it. They can see that I have built it and sold it, and then they can go, no, you had the opportunity to take one, you decided not to, and therefore you don't get one. Now for me, this is a much better system than the system before. It means that, as the ethical issue is gone, the only thing would be if, you are able to sell the vehicles and then they turn around and give you the vehicles anyway. So that would be the only problem that I can see in the system, and only time will tell with it. But if everything goes to plan with this new system, then the double dipping idea is gone, and I'm incredibly thankful for that, just because I think it was a very negative thing that could be manipulated. The next idea is improvements. So these would be things I'd like to see out of this event in the future. The first one is linking the event to war bonds and making it more a monthly idea. Now, what this means is, I talked about this after the Battlefield Engineer event, and I still believe in the idea. So instead of doing these events, which are massively crammed into 11 days, you have 11 days to grind 4 vehicles. And if, let's say, you're ill, or you have work, or you have family, you're screwed. It's as simple as that. There's nothing you can do about it. Instead of doing this, why not have a rota of either 1 or 3 months on the Warbond shop? And what you have on the War Bond shop is the ability at the start of a month to be able to trade in war bonds for a blueprint. Then when you get that blueprint, it opens up the workshop ideal. You have the blueprint here, and you have all of the parts in the assembly scheme that you need to build that idea. You have a test drive alongside of it, and you have a finite amount of time to build it. Let's say that monthly period. So you, as an individual, you can build that vehicle at your own leisure instead of being crammed into an 11-day period. We've seen that there are now different ways in game to be able to research vehicles. You have the standard way to research them, which is of course just to play the game, and you research the next vehicle that you have selected in the tech tree, and now we also have squadron vehicles. So it is shown that there are different ways of setting it up, so therefore, you can do this. So instead of having this really crammed event, just open it up to every month. There is a different blueprint that is available in the Warbond shop, and when you buy that Warbond, that blueprint, then you have a finite amount of time to grind the materials required out of battles, put it together, and then once it's put together, it's yours to keep. That to me would be a much better system than the system that we have now, because the system that we have now, it is incredibly time intensive for that 11-day period, where I would much prefer it to be more open to more people, and also have it so individuals can choose, what vehicle that they want. Just have 3 different blueprints every 3 months or something, so you could pick which one that you want to grind, and go from there. And of course you'd have to do some dailies, you'd have to do some special tasks, but for me that's so much better than Operation Shipyard event. This is basically taking the components of the workshop and working it into a system which I think is much more beneficial to the player than it is to the company because, you know, you less of a finite time, less of use of the market, but you could still add in market elements such as you could coupon these vehicles, therefore you could sell them on, and so on and so forth. So there is opportunities there to use the market, not as much as, you know, is being used now. So that's how I would set up the ideas in the future. The next one is building every vehicle independently. So we brought this up before. I really don't like the idea that you build two MBK 161s and somehow that equals a H34. I would rather have it that you build all of these individually, they have different assembly schemes, and therefore it just makes much more sense thematically. Just like, as I said, if this becomes like a monthly thing or a bi-monthly thing, you could easily set this up in this way for each of the vehicles and not have any of this confusion when it comes to the thematics. Less reliance on first place, already talked about this. I really don't like the fact that you needed first places. I don't think first places mean anything in the context of War Thunder because of how you can manipulate your score. I think kills or caps or whatever it is a better metric than first places. And if you want to keep first places, I would increase it to first to third on each team. The reason for this is because I just think that that is more representative of you know, the team effort instead of an individual's performance. The last one is the some form of community ideal instead of the individual. So something that we see when it comes to like War Thunder festive events, right? So let's see. Like the festive quest for 2018. One of the things that I really like about it is the fact that you have your normal challenges, which could easily be replaced with the workshop stuff, and then you've got this community idea, which pretty much means that you have a few other challenges which are designed to take a little bit longer, but if you as a community build enough of do enough of the challenges, then you can get access to some better rewards. This means that there is more community involvement, there is more people working towards a common goal, whereas in this event, it's an incredibly selfish event, right? There are two ways to approach this event. No, there are three ways to approach this event. The first one is I'm going to play as many games as possible, and I'm going to do this by taking the scummiest lineups possible and either dragging out games to get that battle time or to make games as quick as possible to get the first places. Both of these ideas work against each other, by the way. So therefore you have a few individuals who are trying to get first places really quickly, then leave games and go to the next one because the first place is actually counted even if you left the game. And then you've got the people who are trying to drag out the games as long as possible to get as many boxes as possible. So that's a real issue right there, you know. And the other thing is the fact that squadding up in this mode is pretty much looked down upon because everybody is working towards their own independent vehicles, and through squadding up, if you die, let's say early on, and you're waiting around for the next battle, then what happens is you are technically wasting time. Because you're squadded up with people. So there needs to be some kind of emphasis on squadding up, whether it's in supporting fires, whether it's in something to do with squadding. It would just be a lot nicer to have than what we currently have. Or, as I said, just add in something like the Christmas lights idea, where if we do quests together, then we all collectively get things. So let's say if we, you know, grind out so many components or do so many battles over this period of time, you get access to a super special fifth vehicle, which is something ridiculous like a Bob sample, right? Or, you know, something as simple as that. Something that is not really going to be meta-defining, but is something to bring people together to say, hey, we were there and we did this and here's the proof for it. Just like stuff like the Comet and also the other thing is as well, the P43. Even though they're available in other events, it was nice to have them because you could say, hey, I remember doing that festive event, I remember all the challenges, I remember working together with people, it was a bit of fun. With these events, they are too selfish. They're either selfish in the way that you are trying your best to be able to You're trying your best to be able to get as many components as possible on your own, or they're selfish in the way that you're trying to scalp people on the market. That means that it breeds negativity between people, it destroys the mentality of people because there's no working together, and it makes people very much dislike what they're playing, because instead of enjoying it, instead of just playing with people, you are now making it ultra competitive and you're throwing money into the mix. This is a horrific idea and will not create a stable mental condition for people, which is why right now what you have in the community is an incredibly negative cloud over it, and it's what a surprise straight after this event. So yeah, we saw the same thing with Battlefield Engineer, we saw the same thing with the i7 event. There needs to be some kind of social idea or collective idea to bring people together. That's the way I personally am looking at it. So yeah, my general thoughts on this event: better than the Battlefield Engineer one, has a little bit of work to do, but overall I am generally happy with it. It was possible to do, which is a step up over the other one. I would still like to see it done in a different way though. I definitely think making it longer and making it more tied to individual stuff in the game, such as the Warbond shop, would be the way to go. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Daniel Stanton, John Ryman, Joseph Anders, Martinez, Mopar 1969, Moxie, Super Cacti, Uyins Terry, and Elove Goats, and of course Seductive Trash Can, for supporting the channel.